Dobrodošli, or welcome. This week is the beginning of a whole lot of preparations for our summer holiday, I guess. I know in a lot of places there is a great big COVID lockdown that's happening right now, but here in Europe, because of the EU vaccine passports, we're finally able to start doing things again. So in preparation for our summer break, I need to start planting out and pricking out a lot of these little seedlings that I've got growing so that they can get into the ground where they're more likely to survive us being away for a week or so.
Bok, I'm Mandy O. This is Grow, Make, Cook, and welcome to my garden. I grew up in Australia in a permaculture family, but after we got married, Mr. O and I moved here to his home country of Croatia. I am a passionate and hands-on homemaker and gardener, and I love life's simple pleasures. So join me on my journey, and together we can learn to grow, make, and cook. This week is all about preparing the garden so that it has a chance of survival while we're away on holiday. So let's dig in to the third week in July, or srpanj.
When I am pricking out my little seedlings here, now here I have got American marigolds and a couple of what looks like tomatoes from last year that have sprung up. I'm going to poke this is actually a bamboo chopstick, down in next to the plant that I'm going to try and lift, and then I try and get underneath the plant so that I'm getting as much root as possible. And then I like to hold the stem of a leaf. I tend to find that I break it if I'm holding a leaf itself, but if I'm holding the stem of a leaf like this, the side part, that tends to give me enough leverage to get him out. I do know that lots of other folks say you should only ever hold a leaf when you're pricking out, but this is still not going to damage the main stem, so I'm not really risking the whole plant. And then, with a little bit of a pull, you can see that there he is. He's come out, there's the whole plant, and I'll plant him up in the garden bed here and see if he will survive. Because these baby little infant plants are American marigolds, which a lot of people call true marigolds, these are basically a companion plant for every vegetable in the vegetable garden. So I'm just popping them right here in this bed, right next to my butternuts. Another job that I am doing is clearing some of the gone over plants from these garden beds so that I've got space to put some of my more tender and younger crops. Now these are radishes which have completely gone over. I mean, they never made a very big radish, but I let them go over into flower because a lot of insects really like the tiny little flowers that radishes have. But they're completely done now. There's no flowers left on them. There's hardly any seeds on there, to be honest. So I'm just clearing everything from this bed to make space for more seedlings that I've got up in the house. In this bed that I was preparing yesterday, I'm going to plant out some rocket. Now this I grew from seed, about 5 weeks ago, and I had hoped it would get actually significantly bigger than this before I planted it out. But I'm just going to put that whole pot, which has 3 little plants in it, all out in this corner, and I'm hoping that the rocket will bush up here. Oh gosh, that ground is hard as rocks. Obviously I didn't put quite enough compost in there. I'll just tip him out. Try not to do too much damage. Oh yeah, that looks pretty alright. He's got a good root system. You can see that the roots are starting to get a little bit solid at the bottom, so it's not pot bound, but it definitely is time for this to come out. Yeah, he does not want to stay in that pot any longer. I'll just backfill around him. Now, with these vegetables, it's pretty important to plant these pots at the level of the soil so that it matches. You don't want to sink the vegetables in down too far below the ground level. I will then mulch on top of this, which will kind of obscure that, but I try to make the soil level with the soil in the pot, just so they match up nicely. I also have here some fennel. This is Romanesco fennel, as opposed to the usual Florence fennel. I chose this variety just because it's supposed to be really reliable here. But I have had terrible luck with fennel. I love it. I think that deep anise flavour is just delightful, but I've had very little luck growing it. So I'm going to pop this in here next to the rocket. Now, the astute among you will have realised that I've planted rocket, which is a member of the cabbage family, right next to some kale, which is going over, which is also a member of the cabbage family. And this is kind of a big no-no, usually. Most people will say never plant, any member of the cabbage family nearby to any other member of the cabbage family, because you'll encourage more pests. And it is true that we have a lot of cabbage white butterflies here, but this is the spots I have, and I'm usually pretty conscious of my crop rotation. So in this one particular instance, I'm making an exception, and I'm just going to plant willy-nilly wherever, really. By now, the purists are going to be screaming at their computers about crop rotation and how I shouldn't be doing that because this crop is almost done and I should be replacing it with something from a different family. However, my personal belief about crop rotation is to just not be too bothered by it. I practice polyculture, which means I interplant, well, you can see a squash with some beetroots over there, with some basil and tomato up there. So my one bed always has lots of different things from lots of different families at the same time. But on top of that, I try not to plant the same family of things in the same spot year after year. And for me, that's close enough to pure crop rotation for my own garden. I'm just deadheading my chrysanthemum here, which means I'm taking off all of these dead and spent flower heads. This plant is really probably finished. I think maybe he's got one little bud there, but I think otherwise he's completely finished, and he's really not going to do any more flowering this year. Mostly they do pretty much all their flowering, a typical chrysanthemum, in, I would say, spring and the beginning of summer. So the season for chrysanthemum flowers is over now, and I got this one in remembrance of my great-grandmother. But it was lovely, it was a beautiful white flower, and I think I'd like to try and propagate it. So I have here a mix, and it's a little bit of normal sifted compost, a little bit of perlite, which is the white bits you can see there, and just a little bit of pine bark. So it's a really loose, light, but with a little bit of nutrition mix. I'm going to take this blend of compost and I'm just going to pop it here into one of my old fruit containers, and we're going to try and take some cuttings from this little pink, my grandma would have called it, chrysanthemum. And what I'm intending to do is to cover this, because it will take a few weeks to root and we're going to be away at the end of this month. I'm going to try and make a terrarium style kind of contraption, I guess, in order to keep the moisture in and help this really root. I have been told that if you can nick just a little bit of the bottom of the plant so that you've got this tiny little bit here which was joined onto the root, that these actually don't need any root hormone or anything. So you should just be able to strip off a whole lot of the leaves and then pop him straight into a loose compost like this, and he should just root if you can keep him moist. Selection of the material that you're going to use for your cuttings is quite important. So what you want is something without a bud on it. So this one here, this has what looks like an old empty flower head and maybe even a new bud forming. Whereas this shoot here has no bud, nothing at all really on the tip of it. So it's just a growing shoot. So that is pretty good. And I'm just taking off, I would say, a third of the living leaves and all of the dead stuff, because all of the leaves that are under the ground are just going to rot off and they'll just make it more likely to get infections. I think I've got space for one more cutting in here, so I'm just going to go in and take this one just in here. Now this knife is actually really sharp and cuts right in nice and cleanly, and I'm doing this very quickly, straight from the plant into the potting mix, I guess you'd call it, so that it has as little time to lose moisture as it possibly can. And then when I'm done with this, I'm going to pop it inside in a shady environment. I don't want it in direct sun at all. Actually, looking at the damage I've now done in there and cutting a lot of the nice healthy growth out, I think I might leave that. I think I might just do these 4 cuttings and then leave this alone for a little bit, give it a good water, and then I'll probably plant it out into the garden bed just to see if he'll survive. But I don't actually want to cut too much more off of this. But now the next step will be to put this on a tray. And then I've got a second plastic container. This one is from some lettuce. But what I'm going to do is fit it over the top to act like a little mini propagator. And I've found that if you can find these little bits of plastic that sort of fit together nicely, you don't need to buy expensive kit. Just look at the plastic you're already getting with your groceries, and maybe you can find solutions that would have been rubbish.
Being mindful of the plastic I buy and finding ways to reuse it before you recycle it is one of the ways I try and lessen my impact on the natural world. I hope this week you observe something in nature that reminds you of how precious it is. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe and use the bell icon if you want notifications. And until next time, do widzenia.